J-Roll Electronic Productions, baby.
Welcome to DEMOCREPUBLIX, where we cover the real news that matters to we the people. Before we get started, you can support this channel by clicking the like button, subscribe and click the alarm bell for new content and for notification when we go live. You can also purchase the new Let's Go Brandon t-shirts at tinyurl.com/DRN-shirts or click the link in the description. This breakdown triggered by polarizing circus politics, media-fed mass hysteria, racism, classism, fascism, fear-mongering, political correctness, cultural sanitation, virtue signaling, a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness in the face of growing government corruption and brutality, a growing economic divide that has much of the population struggling to get by, and militarization and militainment. The selling of war and violence as entertainment is manifesting itself in madness, mayhem, and an utter disregard for the very principles and liberties that have kept us out of the clutches of totalitarianism for so long. In New York City, for example, a 200-year-old statue of Thomas Jefferson holding the Declaration of Independence will be removed from the City Council's chambers where it has presided since 1915. Despite Jefferson's many significant accomplishments, without which we might not have the rights we do today, he will be banished for having been, like many of his day, a slave owner. Curiously, that same brutal expectation of infallibility has yet to be applied to many other politically correct yet equally imperfect and fallible role models of the day. In Washington, D.C., a tribunal of 9 men and women spoke with one voice to affirm that the government and its henchmen can literally get away with murder and not be held accountable for their wrongdoing. The Supreme Court's latest rulings are yet another painful lesson in compliance. A reminder that in the American police state, we the people are at the mercy of law enforcement officers who have almost absolute discretion to decide who is a threat, what constitutes resistance, and how harshly they can deal with the citizens they were appointed to serve and protect. All across the country, from California to Connecticut and every point in between, men and women who have worked faithfully and diligently at their jobs for years are being terminated for daring to believe that they have a right to bodily integrity, that they should not be forced, against their conscience or better judgment, to choose between individual liberty and economic survival, and that they and not the government, or the FDA, or the CDC, or the corporate state have dominion over their bodies. Conveniently enough, this COVID-19 pandemic has created yet another double standard in how we the people navigate this country, while we the middling classes are subjected to vaccine mandates and denied even the right to be skeptical about the origins of the COVID virus, let alone the efficacy of the so-called cure. The government, corporations and pharmaceutical companies have been shielded from liability with blanket immunity laws that ensure we are little more than guinea pigs for their questionable experiments. And then in Pennsylvania, a man traveling on a commuter train harassed, assaulted, and then raped a woman over the course of 40 minutes in more than 24 train stops while fellow travelers, watching and filming the attack, did nothing. Not a single witness called 911. Not a single bystander intervened to help the woman. Despite the fact that the man was outnumbered and could have been overwhelmed by those on the train, no collective effort was made to ward off the attack. Only when it was too late, when the damage had been done and the train had pulled into its last stop, did police show up to intervene. There is an allegory here for what is happening to our country and its citizens, who have also been waylaid by a madman, the deep state, stripped of their safety nets, their rights undermined and eroded, and savaged out in the open by a fiend, the American police state and its many operatives, the courts, the legislatures and their various armies, that is devoid of humanity, while those not in the immediate crosshairs watch safely from a distance without making a move to help. This is madness, yet there is a method to this madness. This is how freedom falls and tyranny rises. Remember, authoritarian regimes begin with incremental steps: overcriminalization, surveillance of innocent citizens, imprisonment for non-violent victimless crimes, etc. Bit by bit, the citizenry finds its freedoms being curtailed and undermined for the sake of national security. And slowly the populace begins to submit. No one speaks up for those being targeted. No one resists these minor acts of oppression. No one recognizes the indoctrination into tyranny for what it is. Historically, this failure to speak truth to power has resulted in whole populations being conditioned to tolerate unspoken cruelty toward their fellow human beings, a bystander syndrome in which people remain silent and disengaged mere onlookers in the face of abject horrors and injustice. Time has insulated us from the violence perpetrated by past regimes in their pursuit of power, the crucifixion and slaughter of innocents by the Romans, the torture of the Inquisition, the atrocities of the Nazis, the butchery of the fascists, the bloodshed by the communists, and the cold-blooded war machines run by the military-industrial complex. We can disassociate from such violence. We can convince ourselves that we are somehow different from the victims of government abuse. We can continue to spout empty political rhetoric about how great America is, despite the evidence to the contrary. We can avoid responsibility for holding the government accountable. We can zip our lips and bind our hands and shut our eyes. In other words, we can continue to exist in a state of denial. Yet there is no denying the ugly, hard truths that become more evident with every passing day. The government is not our friend. Nor does it work for we the people. Our so-called government representatives do not actually represent us, the citizenry. We are now ruled by an oligarchic elite of governmental and corporate interests, whose main interest is in perpetuating power and control. Republicans and Democrats like to act as if there's a huge difference between them and their policies. However, they are not sworn enemies so much as they are partners in crime, united in a common goal, which is to maintain the status quo. The lesser of two evils is still evil. Some years ago, a newspaper headline asked the question, "What's the difference between a politician and a psychopath?" The answer, then and now, remains the same: none. There is virtually no difference between psychopaths and politicians. More than terrorism, more than domestic extremism, more than gun violence and organized crime, the U.S. government has become a greater menace to the life, liberty and property of its citizens than any of the so-called dangers from which the government claims to protect us. The government knows exactly which buttons to push in order to manipulate the populace and gain the public's cooperation and compliance. If voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it. America's shadow government, which is comprised of unelected government bureaucrats, corporations, contractors, paper pushers, and button pushers, who are actually calling the shots behind the scenes right now and operates beyond the reach of the Constitution with no real accountability to the citizenry, is the real reason why we the people have no control over our government. You no longer have to be poor, black, or guilty to be treated like a criminal in America. All that is required is that you belong to the suspect class, that is, the citizenry of the American police state. As a de facto member of this so-called criminal class, every U.S. citizen is now guilty until proven innocent. We the people are no longer shielded by the rule of law. By gradually whittling away at our freedoms, free speech, assembly, due process, privacy, etc., the government has, in effect, liberated itself from its contractual agreement to respect our constitutional rights while resetting the calendar back to a time when we had no Bill of Rights to protect us from the long arm of the government. Private property means nothing if the government can take your home, car, or money under the flimsiest of pretexts, whether it be asset forfeiture schemes, eminent domain, or overdue property taxes. Likewise, private property means little at a time when SWAT teams and other government agents can invade your home, break down your doors, kill your dog, wound or kill you, damage your furnishings, and terrorize your family. We now find ourselves caught in the crosshairs of a showdown between the rights of the individual and the so-called emergency state, and we the people are losing. All of those freedoms we cherish, the ones enshrined in the Constitution, the ones that affirm our right to free speech and assembly, due process, privacy, bodily integrity, the right to not have police seize our property without a warrant, or search and detain us without probable cause, amount to nothing when the government and its agents are allowed to disregard those prohibitions on government overreach at will. If there is an absolute maxim by which the federal government seems to operate, it is that the American taxpayer always gets ripped off. Our freedoms, especially the Fourth Amendment, continue to be choked out by a prevailing view among government bureaucrats that they have the right to search, seize, strip, scan, spy on, probe, pat down, taser, and arrest any individual at any time and for the slightest provocation. Forced vaccinations, forced cavity searches, forced colonoscopies, forced blood draws, forced breath alcohol tests, forced DNA extractions, forced eye scans, forced inclusion in biometric databases. These are just a few ways in which Americans continue to be reminded that we have. Finally, freedom is never free. There is always a price, always a sacrifice that must be made in order to safeguard one's freedoms. We cannot remain silent in the face of the government's ongoing overreaches, power grabs, and crimes against humanity. Evil disguised as bureaucracy is still evil. Indeed, this is what Hannah Arendt referred to as the banality of evil. Such evil happens when bureaucrats, governmental and corporate, unquestioningly carry out orders that are immoral and inhumane, obey immoral instructions unthinkingly, march in lockstep with tyrants, mindlessly perpetuate acts of terror and inhumanity, and justify it all as just doing one's job. Such evil prevails when good men and women do nothing. By doing nothing, by remaining silent, by being bystanders to injustice, hate and wrongdoing, good people become as guilty as the perpetrator. There's a term for this phenomenon where people stand by, watch and do nothing even when there is no risk to their safety, while some horrific act takes place. Someone is mugged or raped or bullied or left to die. It's called the bystander effect. It works the same whether you're talking about kids watching bullies torment a fellow student on a playground, bystanders watching someone dying on a sidewalk, passengers on a train filming a fellow traveler be raped without intervening to help, or citizens remaining silent in the face of government atrocities. We need to stop being silent bystanders. It's time to stand up for truth, for justice, for freedom, not just for ourselves but for all humanity. Tomorrow may be too late. Let us know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Like, share and subscribe. And check out our Patreon for exclusive content and DEMOCREPUBLIX.com for the latest in news. Until next time.